They say a Montana winter doesn't just freeze your skin, it freezes your soul. For Samuel, a retired veteran living alone in a secluded cabin, the ice had set in decades ago. He moved through his days in a heavy silence, a weight his neighbors in the small town below mistook for hostility. They didn't see the invisible scars he carried from the battlefield. Instead, they saw a bitter old hermit and met him with cruel behavior and hushed whispers. To them, he was an outcast, a shadow on the edge of their community. But one night, as the temperature plummeted to a bone-chilling 20 below, a sound pierced the howling wind. It was a high-pitched, desperate cry. Samuel grabbed his coat and stepped into the storm. Behind his cabin, a heartbreaking scene awaited him. A mother deer lay frozen and lifeless in the snow. Beside her, a tiny fawn was hopelessly tangled in a jagged wire fence, its small body trembling against the brutal cold. A primal instinct, something long buried within Samuel, stirred. He saw life in peril, a creature as lost and alone as he felt. Ignoring his own aching joints and the biting frost, he knelt in the deep snow. The metal was ice cold against his fingers as he began the delicate work of freeing the animal. As he carefully snipped the last wire, the fawn looked up at him. Its eyes, wide with a pure, trusting innocence, shattered the icy fortress Samuel had built around his heart for decades. He gently scooped up the fragile creature and carried it back into the warmth of his cabin. The contrast between the raging blizzard outside and the quiet safety inside was stark. As he wrapped the shivering fawn in a thick wool blanket, a wave of memories crashed over him. He saw the faces of his wife and young daughter, their laughter echoing in his mind, lost years ago in a tragic accident that had drained all the color from his world. For the first time in 20 years, tears welled in his eyes. The wall he had so carefully constructed around his emotions began to crumble, brick by brick. He stayed awake all night, a silent vigil beside the fire. With a small dropper, he painstakingly fed the fawn, drop by drop, whispering words of encouragement. The air was thick with suspense. Every shallow breath the fawn took felt like a battle against the inevitable. Would this tiny, fragile life make it through the night? It was a question that mirrored his own struggle for survival, not on a battlefield of war, but in the desolate landscape of his own grief. The fire crackled, casting long, dancing shadows on the walls, as man and animal clung to a fragile thread of hope. As the first rays of dawn painted the snowy landscape in hues of pink and gold, a small miracle unfolded in the quiet cabin. The fawn stirred, then slowly, unsteadily, pushed itself up onto its wobbly legs. It took a hesitant step, then another, and nudged Samuel's hand with its wet nose. A wave of relief, so profound it almost buckled his knees, washed over Samuel. He had done it. He had saved a life. In that small, simple gesture of gratitude from the fawn, he felt a flicker of purpose he hadn't known in years. Just then, a sharp knock echoed through the cabin. Samuel opened the door to find the local sheriff standing on his porch, his face grim. This was the man who had spent years trying to evict him, who saw Samuel as nothing more than a nuisance, a blight on the town. The sheriff's eyes were hard, ready for a confrontation. But then, his gaze shifted past Samuel into the warm light of the cabin. He saw the rugged, grizzled veteran, a man he had labeled a monster, gently cradling a fragile fawn in his arms. The sheriff froze. The image was so powerful, so contrary to everything he had believed, that it stopped him in his tracks. In that single, silent moment, the sheriff's perception of Samuel was completely shattered. He saw not a hermit, but a protector, not a threat, but a man of deep, hidden compassion. A profound sense of shame and remorse washed over him for his years of judgment and harassment. This wasn't the monster he had been hunting. This was perhaps the most compassionate soul in the entire county. He realized that true strength wasn't in authority or intimidation, but in the quiet, selfless act of kindness he was witnessing. The sheriff, humbled, simply nodded and turned away, leaving Samuel in peace. The story of the rescue spread through the valley like wildfire. The sheriff, moved by what he saw, shared the tale with others. The townspeople, who had once whispered and pointed, began to see Samuel in a new light. They stopped seeing a stranger and started seeing a neighbor, a hero. The cruel labels were replaced with words of admiration. One by one, they began to make the trek up to his cabin, not with eviction notices, but with offerings. They brought firewood, canned goods, and warm blankets not out of pity, but out of a newfound respect. They saw the man, not the myth. For Samuel, this transformation was more than he could have ever imagined. Each friendly face, each bag of supplies left on his porch, was a small chip in the icy wall that had isolated him for so long. Saving the fawn hadn't just been about rescuing an animal. It had been a beacon of hope in the darkness of his life. It was proof that even after decades of loss and isolation, it's never too late to find a reason to live, a connection to the world. The winter that almost shattered Samuel became the cornerstone of a legend whispered through the Montana mountains. It was a season of profound loss, but also of a new beginning. The tiny, shivering fawn he had rescued from the biting cold, whom he named Hope, had blossomed into a magnificent doe. Her coat was the color of warm earth, and her eyes held the untamed spirit of the wild. Yet, despite the powerful call of her natural world, Hope never truly strayed from Samuel's side. Their connection was a quiet language understood only between them. Every single morning, without fail, a gentle nudge at his cabin window would signal her arrival. It was a simple, heart-touching routine, a daily reaffirmation of a bond that seemed to defy the very laws of nature. This wasn't just a man and a deer. It was a friendship that became a symbol of something pure and unbreakable in the heart of the wilderness. But as the seasons turned, a new kind of winter threatened to descend upon their peaceful valley. A shadow loomed on the horizon, cast by a massive development corporation. They had grand plans to bulldoze the ancient forest and erect a sprawling luxury resort. Their approach was brutal, a stark, cold-hearted disregard for the delicate ecosystem that Samuel and his wild companions called home. The roar of machinery began to replace the song of the birds, and the pristine air grew heavy with the scent of diesel and destruction. This forest wasn't just land to Samuel. It was his sanctuary, the only place he'd ever truly felt at peace. It was the home of Hope and countless other creatures he had come to know and protect. He knew he couldn't stand by and watch it be torn apart. So, he stood his ground. He became a lone figure of defiance against the corporate giant, a quiet but unyielding protector of his domain. His resistance, however, was met with aggression. The developers saw him not as a guardian, but as an obstacle to be removed. They resorted to intimidation, hoping to scare the old man away. But Samuel was forged in fires they couldn't comprehend. The threats only strengthened his resolve. Then, one sun-drenched afternoon, their cruel carelessness escalated into disaster. Samuel was making his usual patrol through the woods, his senses on high alert, when a deafening explosion ripped through the valley. It was a premature dynamite blast, a reckless act by the construction crew. The ground trembled violently, and with a horrifying groan, the mountainside gave way. A massive rockslide thundered down, a cascade of stone and dirt, swallowing everything in its path. Through the thick, choking dust, Samuel's sharp eyes caught a flicker of movement. A young mountain goat, a kid barely old enough to leave its mother, was trapped, pinned beneath the heavy, unforgiving debris. Its bleats were thin and desperate, a sound of pure terror that pierced Samuel's heart. In that moment, there was no hesitation. The man who had faced the horrors of war, who had built a life on solitude, saw only a life in peril. Forgetting his own safety, he charged headfirst into the chaos. Rocks were still falling, the air thick with dust that stung his eyes and clogged his throat. He dug with his bare hands, his muscles screaming in protest, fueled by a primal need to save this innocent creature. The rescue was a frantic, brutal success. He managed to free the terrified kid, which scampered away to safety. But Samuel's victory came at a great cost. The shifting rocks had caught him, and he was badly injured, his body broken by the very mountain he sought to protect. Lying in a sterile hospital bed, the sharp, antiseptic smell a world away from his forest home, Samuel's mind drifted. The trauma of the rockslide triggered a vivid, agonizing flashback. He was no longer in Montana. He was back in the suffocating smoke and chaos of the battlefield. He could smell the acrid smoke, hear the cries, and feel the soul-crushing loss of his brothers in arms, a weight he had carried in silence for years. A wave of heavy emotion, of grief and guilt, washed over him, but this time, the ending was different. As he wrestled with the ghosts of his past, something remarkable was happening back in the valley. The town, the very community that had once viewed him with suspicion, labeling him a recluse and an outcast, had rallied. The story of his heroic rescue, of his selfless stand against the corporation, had spread like wildfire. Leading the charge was the local sheriff. Once a man who had kept a wary eye on the hermit in the woods, he now saw Samuel with new clarity. He saw not a strange outsider, but the very soul of their community. A man who embodied the resilient, untamed spirit of their home. He organized protests, blocking the developer's path, his voice echoing the town's newfound outrage. And then, in a twist that felt like karma itself, the truth came to light. An investigation sparked by the accident exposed a web of corruption. The development company was found guilty of numerous illegal safety violations and blatant environmental disregard. Their permits were revoked, their projects shut down permanently. The forest was safe. Weeks later, when Samuel finally returned home, his body was battered and he walked with a limp, but his spirit was whole. As he reached the edge of the woods, his familiar sanctuary, a figure emerged from the tree line. It was Hope. She stood there, waiting for him, her large, dark eyes holding the same look of pure innocence he remembered from the day he found her. It was a deeply emotional homecoming, a silent reunion that spoke volumes. The crushing weight of his lifelong struggle with loneliness finally lifted. He wasn't alone anymore. The suspense that had gripped the valley was over, ending in a victory for nature and for the man who had become its voice. In that moment, Samuel understood his true purpose. His life's mission wasn't just to survive his own pain, but to actively protect the innocent and the voiceless. Today, if you visit that Montana valley, you won't hear tales of a lonely hermit. You'll hear the story of the guardian of the wild. Samuel learned that hope wasn't just the name he gave a deer. She was the living, breathing embodiment of the hope that had taught him a profound lesson. As long as there is compassion, as long as there is something to fight for, there is always a reason to keep going. The sky over Montana had turned a bruised, angry purple, and the air tasted thick, like charcoal and ash. Samuel, standing on his porch, knew in his bones that the mountains he called home were facing their greatest test. A monstrous wildfire was raging, a fiery beast sweeping down the slopes, devouring everything it touched. Down in the valley, the evacuation sirens began their mournful wail, a desperate cry for people to flee. But Samuel, he wasn't going anywhere. To everyone else, he was just a stubborn old man, a hermit clinging to his cabin on the ridge. But what they did unsee was the desperate question burning in his heart. Where would they go? The thousands of silent residents of these woods, the deer, the bears, the foxes, where was their escape? As he stood there, lost in thought, a figure emerged from the smoke-filled haze. It was Hope, a doe he'd known for years, a familiar, gentle presence in his isolated life. But this time, she wasn't alone. Huddled beside her, trembling uncontrollably, was a tiny spotted fawn, no bigger than a house cat. Hope's eyes, large and dark, met his. They held no fear, only a pure, innocent trust, a silent plea that spoke louder than any words. It was a look that said, "Save my child." In that moment, Samuel, the 70-year-old veteran, felt a surge of purpose he hadn't felt in years. This would be the final, most important battle of his life. Gently, he scooped up the little fawn. It was so light, its heart beating a frantic rhythm against his hand. He unzipped his heavy wool jacket and carefully tucked the tiny creature inside, zipping it up just enough to keep it secure and warm against his chest. He looked at Hope and gave a sharp nod towards the east. "This way," he murmured, his voice raspy from the smoke. He pointed her toward the old limestone caves. Hidden behind the waterfall, or place he knew could offer sanctuary. With the fawn nestled against him and the mother doe trotting faithfully behind, Samuel began the treacherous journey. The path was barely visible, shrouded in an orange-brown fog. Embers, like malevolent fireflies, danced in the air, singeing his clothes and stinging his skin. The heat was a physical force, pressing in on him, making it hard to breathe. The air grew thin, and each gasp for oxygen felt like swallowing fire. As he struggled onward, the smoke and heat triggered something deep within him. A memory, vivid and terrible, erupted in his mind. He was no longer on a Montana mountain. He was in a burning house, decades ago. He saw the flames, heard the screams, and felt the crushing, helpless grief of losing his family. The old trauma threatened to paralyze him, to pin him to the ground with its unbearable weight. But this time was different. This time, he wasn't helpless. The memory of that heartbreaking loss didn't break him, it forged him. It fueled a new, unbreakable resolve. He clenched his jaw, tears mixing with the soot on his face. He made a silent promise, to the universe, to the memory of his family, to the tiny life he carried. He would not let death win again. Not today. After what felt like an eternity, stumbling through the smoke-choked forest, he saw the shimmer of the waterfall through the haze. He pushed through a final curtain of thicket, and there it was, the cave entrance. It was their sanctuary. He stumbled inside, the air cooler, cleaner. Other animals were already there: raccoons, a black bear, several rabbits, all huddled together. Their natural instincts as predator and prey silenced by a greater, common enemy. He gently placed the fawn on the cool stone floor. Hope immediately nuzzled her baby, licking it clean. As he watched them, the adrenaline that had carried him finally drained away. His legs gave out, and he collapsed, his lungs screaming for air that wasn't there. The world spun, and then everything went black. The next morning, the fire had passed, leaving behind a scarred, blackened landscape. A search and rescue team made their way up the scorched ridge, expecting the worst. They found Samuel's burned-out cabin and followed his faint tracks. When they reached the caves near the waterfall, they stopped dead, witnessing a scene so powerful it brought tears to the eyes of even the most hardened rescuers. There, on the ground, lay the unconscious body of an old man. And lying protectively over him, like a living blanket, was a large doe, her body heat keeping him warm against the morning chill. Curled up beside them, safe and sound, was a tiny fawn. It was a profound, sacred moment. The man who had risked his life to save the wild was now being guarded by the very life he had saved. It was a perfect circle of compassion. News of the miracle on the mountain spread like wildfire through the town below. The people who had once dismissed Samuel as a crazy old hermit were struck with a deep sense of remorse and awe. Their mockery turned to admiration, their indifference to inspiration. Samuel survived. His lungs were scarred, a permanent reminder of his ordeal, but he was alive, and he was no longer the lonely hermit. The community, moved by his story, came together to rebuild his cabin. But it wasn't just a cabin anymore. It became the headquarters for a new wildlife sanctuary. funded, and run by the very people who had once ignored the needs of the forest. Those who had been careless with nature, who had treated the woods as their personal playground, were now the most dedicated volunteers. They patrolled the forest, helped rehabilitate injured animals, and taught their children about the sacred balance of life. Samuel's single act of bravery had ignited a fire of change in the heart of the community, a fire of compassion far more powerful than the one that had ravaged the mountain. This shift in the town's soul was Samuel's greatest reward, his truest ray of hope. The story of the veteran and the deer became a legend, a modern-day fable told across America. It was a testament to the idea that one person, armed with nothing but courage and compassion, can change the world. Samuel found his peace, living out his days on his beloved mountain, surrounded by a community that finally understood his language. He knew his legacy wasn't in buildings or statues, but in every protected animal, every replanted tree, and every heartbeat of the mountain he had saved, and that had, in turn, saved him. Years flew by, and the story of Samuel became woven into the very fabric of the Montana mountains. He was an old man now, his body as weathered as the ancient pines that surrounded his cabin, but his spirit was as fierce and unyielding as ever. The legend of the man who talked to the wild had traveled far, eventually reaching the bustling streets of New York City, and a young journalist named Sarah. Driven by an intense curiosity, she packed her bags and journeyed into the heart of Montana to meet him. She needed to understand the man who had traded civilization for solitude, the man who spoke the language of the forest. One crisp afternoon, as they sat on his porch, Sarah looked at Samuel, his eyes fixed on a herd of deer grazing peacefully in a meadow below. They were the descendants of Hope, the first fawn he had saved all those years ago. The question she had traveled thousands of miles to ask finally escaped her lips. "Why?" she asked softly. "Why did you give your whole life to these mountains? To this place?" Samuel didn't answer right away. He just smiled, a deeply emotional, contented smile that held the wisdom of a lifetime. It was a smile that spoke of peace, of finding a home not in a place, but in a purpose. Suddenly, their quiet moment was shattered. A distressed cry echoed from the thicket, sharp and panicked. Samuel's calm demeanor vanished, replaced by the alertness of a seasoned guardian. He knew that sound. A predator was on the prowl. But there was a more sinister threat lurking in the shadows: illegal poachers. Their cruel traps were a hidden danger, indiscriminate and deadly. Sarah's heart pounded in her chest as she saw it, a baby animal, caught and terrified. Panic seized her, but Samuel's instincts, honed by decades in the wild, took over. His body was frail, his movements slowed by age, but the fire in his eyes burned as brightly as ever. This would be his final struggle against human greed. With a strength that seemed to defy his years, he moved toward the sound. Sarah followed, her reporter's skepticism melting away, replaced by awe. He confronted the poachers not with violence, but with an unshakable authority, the authority of someone who belonged to the mountains. He was their guardian, their voice, and in a moment of tense negotiation and sheer willpower, he managed to free the trapped animal, a tiny, trembling fawn. As he gently cradled it, the fawn looked up at Sarah with eyes full of that same signature innocence she'd heard so much about. In that instant, she felt she was witnessing the purest form of grace, a truly heart-touching moment that would change her perspective on life forever. That evening, the warmth of the fireplace cast a gentle glow across the cabin. Samuel, quiet and contemplative, handed Sarah an old, tattered journal. Its pages were filled with faded ink, chronicling a life she could barely imagine. She read about the horrors of war that had scarred his youth, the heartbreaking loss of his family that had shattered his world, and the fateful night he found and saved Hope, the little fawn that had saved him in return. "My time is near," he whispered, his voice raspy like dry leaves. "But this forest, it must never be alone again." Sarah finally understood. The deep, unwavering love Samuel felt for these woods wasn't just a duty. It was the only thing that had ever truly healed his wounded soul. A few days later, in the quiet, sacred glow of a mountain sunrise, Samuel passed away peacefully on his porch, looking out over the valley he loved. The news was heartbreaking for the entire community. The man who was once an outsider, a subject of suspicion, was now their hero. But they knew he hadn't truly left them. In a powerful act of unity, the sheriff and the townspeople came together. They successfully petitioned to have Samuel's sanctuary declared a protected national landmark, ensuring his life's work would endure for generations. And Sarah, she didn't go back to the city. The story she had come to find had become her own. She stayed, ready to carry on Samuel's legacy. It was the ultimate realization, a beautiful twist of fate. The town that had once shown cruel behavior toward a lonely, broken veteran was now the fiercest protector of his dream. Samuel, the man, was gone, but his spirit lived on. It was in every rustle of the leaves, in the call of a distant hawk, in the gentle flow of the creek. Every new life born in that forest was a ray of hope, a living testament to a man who proved that one soul's compassion could heal an entire landscape. And even now, if you listen closely, the wind whistling through the Montana peaks still whispers his name: Samuel, the man who taught a nation how to love the wild. Decades have passed, yet the spirit of Samuel remains intertwined with these Montana peaks. What was once his solitary refuge is now a world-renowned wildlife sanctuary, a testament to a life lived in harmony with nature. I'm Sarah, and many years ago, I came here as a young journalist, drawn by the story of a man who spoke to the wind. Now, I am the matriarch of the foundation that carries on his legacy. I often find myself sitting in this expanded cabin, the same one where Samuel lived, thumbing through the tattered pages of his journals. His words, his memories, they're still alive here, whispering through the pines. One morning, the air was thick with mist, a familiar mountain blanket. Suddenly, a deep guttural rumble echoed through the valley. An avalanche, it tore through the northern ridge, a terrifying display of nature's raw power. I grabbed my binoculars, my heart pounding, scanning the debris field. That's when I saw it, a flash of white against the snow and rock. A fawn, ghost white and impossibly rare, was trapped beneath a shelf of ice. It was a baby, helpless and alone. In that instant, nothing else mattered. Age may have silvered my hair, but it hasn't touched the fire within. There was no hesitation. I had to get to it. I quickly rallied the rescue team. The terrain was treacherous, a chaotic mess of snow, jagged rocks, and splintered trees. Every step was a risk, the ground unstable beneath our feet. But the image of that trapped fawn pushed us forward. We were a mix of seasoned rangers and young volunteers, all united by a single purpose. We worked methodically, carefully digging, clearing away the heavy, compacted snow and ice. The fawn was shivering, its breaths coming in shallow puffs of white. Finally, after what felt like an eternity, we pulled it free. The tiny creature, trembling but alive, looked up at me. Its eyes were pools of pure innocence, so deep and knowing. And in that gaze, I saw something so familiar, it took my breath away. It felt as if Samuel himself was looking back at me. A silent acknowledgement, a thank you from the heart of the mountain. It was a profoundly emotional moment, a connection that transcended words, but our relief was shattered in an instant. The buzz of a drone cut through the quiet, a mechanical insect in this pristine wilderness. Then, another. High-tech poachers. They had been tracking the white fawn, using thermal imaging and advanced technology to pinpoint their rare prize. Their cold, calculated approach was a jarring contrast to the raw, natural beauty around us. It was a stark reminder that even in this sanctuary, this haven we had fought so hard to build, the shadow of human greed is never far away. The fight for this little life was far from over. A new kind of struggle was beginning, one not against the elements, but against the worst of human nature. The poachers, clad in tactical gear, began to close in. They were relentless, their faces set with a grim determination. A tense standoff ensued on the snowy slopes. Our small rescue team, armed only with our conviction, stood between them and the fawn. The air grew heavy with suspense. We were outnumbered, outgunned. Fear began to creep in. How could we possibly protect this fragile, precious life against such malice? It felt like we were on the verge of losing everything Samuel had worked for. But then, something truly miraculous happened. As if the mountain itself had heard our silent plea, a movement flickered at the edge of the tree line. From the dense forest emerged a pack of wolves, their movements fluid and silent. They fanned out, their golden eyes fixed on the poachers. On the other side, a herd of elk appeared, their powerful bodies forming an imposing line. It was an impossible alliance, predator and prey standing side by side, a living, breathing wall between us and the intruders. They weren't threatening us, they were protecting one of their own. The poachers froze, their high-tech gadgets useless against this primal display of unity. You could see the terror dawn on their faces as they realized they were no longer the hunters. This was nature's domain, and they had trespassed. They scrambled, abandoning their expensive equipment, and fled back down the mountain, swallowed by the wilderness they had sought to exploit. It was a moment of pure karma. Even the most cynical members of our team were speechless, overwhelmed with emotion. The mountain had defended itself. With the danger gone, we carefully checked the white fawn one last time. It was uninjured, just a little shaken. We carried it to a sheltered grove, a place where its mother would surely find it. As we released it, the little creature gave one last look back, then bounded away into the trees, a ghostly form disappearing into the woods. Just then, the clouds parted, and a brilliant sunrise broke over the peaks. The sky exploded in hues of gold, pink, and violet, washing over the landscape. It was more than just a new day. It was a ray of hope, a promise of a new era of protection for this sacred place. Samuel's life, once marked by the heartbreak of solitude, had blossomed into a legacy that touched and saved countless lives, both animal and human. Standing there, watching that sunrise, I finally understood. The kindness Samuel poured into this mountain didn't end with him. It created a ripple, a cycle that continues to grow, touching more hearts than he could have ever imagined. This emotional saga, born from one veteran's broken heart, has become a testament to the enduring power of compassion. It's a story that continues to inspire people across the country and around the world, reminding us all that one person's love for the wild can truly change the world. The jagged peaks of Montana stood stoic and unchanged, a silent witness to the passing of time. But below them, the stone chimney of a legendary cabin, once a beacon of warmth and life, no longer breathed its familiar curl of smoke. Sarah, at 85, was a paradox. Surrounded by the hustle of well-meaning visitors, her soul wandered a vast, barren wasteland of solitude. Samuel's diary, its pages, now brittle and yellowed, lay open on her lap. It felt less like a book and more like a mirror, reflecting the tattered, fading fabric of her own existence. One afternoon, the sky turned a menacing gray. A violent blizzard began to howl, a haunting echo of that fateful night so many decades ago. Sarah sat motionless by the window, her gaze lost in the swirling white void outside. The world disappeared, replaced by memory. A vivid image flickered in her mind, as clear as yesterday. Samuel, his rough hand gently stroking the head of Hope, the young deer they had rescued. It was a memory so potent, so filled with a love that warmed her even now, that it felt more real than the cold glass against her fingertips. Through the thick curtain of falling snow, a shape emerged from the tree line, an elderly deer, moving with a heavy, tired grace that spoke of a long, hard life. It didn't wander aimlessly. It walked with purpose, stopping directly outside her window. Sarah knew, with a certainty that defied logic, this was a descendant of Hope. This was the legacy of the life she and Samuel had fought so desperately to save from a storm just like this one. The deer looked at her, its dark, liquid eyes holding a hauntingly familiar innocence, a reflection of the very first deer they had sheltered. In that single, silent gaze, a lifetime of suppressed emotion crashed over her. A wave of pure, undiluted love, followed by an undertow of unbearable loss. The ultimate karma of nature, the universe's most brutal lesson, settled upon her with crushing weight. Everything that is loved, everything that is cherished, must eventually be lost. It was a heartbreaking, inescapable truth she had spent years trying to outrun. Her hand, frail and trembling, reached out to touch the cold window pane, a desperate attempt to bridge the impossible distance between them. But her strength, the stubborn will that had carried her through decades of grief, had finally deserted her. Her hand fell back to her lap. A single, hot tear escaped and landed on the open page of Samuel S. Journola book, born from a soldier's trauma and a lonely man's desperate hope for connection. The cruelties of the world had once driven Samuel to seek refuge in this isolated wilderness. This cabin, this sanctuary, had been his shield. Now, for Sarah, that same sanctuary had become a lonely, silent tomb. There was no glimmer of hope left in the frozen air, only the heavy, suffocating suspense of the final breath. The storm raged, growing more ferocious with each passing minute, burying the world and all its memories in a pristine, unforgiving blanket of white. Outside the glass, the old deer, as if sensing the end of a shared story, curled up in the deepening snow, its body a dark shape against the blinding white. Inside, Sarah's eyes, heavy with the weight of 85 years, slowly fluttered shut. The next morning, the storm had passed. The world was reborn, silent and sparkling under a winter sun. When rescuers, alerted by her absence, finally broke down the cabin door, they found her. She was sitting peacefully in her chair, her face a mask of serene sorrow, her fingers still clutching Samuel's diary. Outside, just beneath the window, a small mound of fresh snow marked a final resting place. Beneath it lay the frozen body of the old deer, the emotional legacy of Samuel and Hope. A story of rescue, love, and survival had reached its silent, tragic conclusion. The mountain, which had once stood as a witness to a love that defied the odds, was now only a monument to a profound and permanent silence. It served as a final, somber reminder that while love might feel eternal, the void it leaves behind is a tragedy that even the mountains cannot heal. Thank you for watching. If this story touched you, please consider subscribing for more.